Hello, welcome one and all to the latest ThingCast. I am Josh Weiss, producer and co-writer of The Thing Expanded, and today I'm joined by my fellow producer Dominic Wallace and a member of our advisor circle and a Thing scholar, Phil Hoare, author of The Thing: The History of a Franchise, wherever fine books are sold. How you guys doing?
I'm doing very well.
Also doing very well. We are a global community today, even though I am in the continental United States of America. I am British. So we're representing a global initiative here of thing connoisseurs.
Yeah, it's the Thing UN, pretty much.
Yes.
And being in Australia, I'm in the future.
How is the future?
And it's
Have the aliens taken over yet?
We've got flying cars.
Brilliant.
We're just going to share them with you guys.
And I just want to say thank you, Phil. It is the crack of dawn where you are, and you agreed to hop on this live stream, which is very commendable because I don't function at 5 in the morning. So,
Well, we'll see how I go.
so yeah, today, as you've probably seen from our multiple social media posts, we're going to be discussing the sort of science fiction trail that leads to the Carpenter film. And Phil, actually, we were going to start with Lovecraft, but I think Phil is going to take us back to the 19th century first. We're going to start all the way back in the 1800s.
Yeah, so when I wrote the book, one of the things that a lot of people wrote and talked to me about was that I didn't put in the Lovecraft short story Mountain of Madness, and I was under a very strict word count, and to put that in would have taken quite a bit of the book. So I just made the decision, yes, it leads to it. And I do regret not even mentioning it. I should have mentioned it. But the problem was that it was a much bigger chapter than people probably realize. And now that I'm working on the audiobook version, I can put everything back in. And so I've been beavering away. And I thought we'd talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. It's been an age since I've read any Lovecraft, really. But leading up to this, I did dive a little bit back into The Mountain of Madness. Something that sticks out to me that is something that is very easy to... Oh, that's a beautiful version of that.
Yeah, this
But
is
yeah,
the manga version that Dark Horse published. Sorry.
I need to look at the artwork for that because I've never seen it. How do you describe the undescribable? But yes, there's a portion in the second part, I think, maybe the third part, which it was released in a serialized format. So reading it as not exactly long form content because it's not that long, but still a good 3-4-ish hour read. The pacing can get a bit choppy, but there is something in there that I can look at the Thing, the 1982 film, and go, haha, this is like shot for shot exactly from the Mountain of Madness, which is when the expedition of is it the Arkham? But when they discover the remains of the camp of the folks that traveled before them, and they see shredded clothing in ways that are completely alien and inhuman. I can't remember how he describes it exactly, but it is very like distinctly, oh yeah, a knife couldn't have made this. Dog claws definitely didn't make this. Something eviscerated this clothing in this tent in an alien way. And I mean, come on, anyone can carve things up in peculiar ways, but there is something about that the way that Lovecraft wrote that scene that is quite frightening because you don't question it. I remember not questioning it, being like, "Oh yeah, aliens did this. A spooky monster did this." And in The Thing, when we see when Mac notices the shredded remains of clothing, he kind of gets the idea that, yep, something horrible did this, and that becomes the de facto, the first method of something's not right when you see shredded clothing on the floor. Yeah, which later, I mean, I'm kind of upset that that wasn't used more in the film, like how to piece together who's a thing and who's not. But we get the blood test scene, which is beautiful. But yes, Lovecraft is an obvious inspiration for so much science fiction moving forward that the footprint, much like the the prints that are found at the Mountain of Madness echo throughout science fiction history. It's impossible to avoid Lovecraft, especially the imagery and the concern of the unknown. I mean, that's Lovecraft's famous quote, isn't it? The fear of the unknown is the greatest fear itself. So I'm totally paraphrasing and butchering the quote. But yeah, how could you even start to look at Lovecraft in relation to The Thing? Take us, Phil, on that journey of, okay, how do you start to dissect Lovecraft in terms of analyzing The Thing?
Well, I think you begin with just the simple timing of it all. So he wrote it much earlier, but it was published in 1936, and Who Goes There comes out in 1938. So it's literally 2 years. So
Yeah.
it's a bit suspicious there to say that they cannot be like Campbell wasn't influenced by it. And especially when you have like scientific expeditions in Antarctica. And as you said, there's a lot of beats in there that are, it's just the horror elements, really. But what I kind of found of interest is that Lovecraft himself had based that on something else from nearly 100 years earlier, which was the Edgar Allan. Now I have to read this because it's such a weird name. The
Yes.
narrative of Gordon Pym of Nantucket.
Arthur Gordon
And
Pym.
again, we have trailers going down to Antarctica and bumping into very strange things. And one of the things that about the 1982 movie is how it ends so abruptly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go backwards, all these things seem to end quite abruptly. And Who Goes There ends quite abruptly. All these things ended quite abruptly, and so did the Arthur Gordon Pym story. People actually complained bitterly, almost in an exact mirror to John Carpenter's The Thing, how it ended. But
Is
what
that
gets
it?
me, hey,
Is that it? Like, that's the reaction that people got. Hey, what? You can't just end it like this.
In fact, the publisher of when they reprinted the Edgar Allan Poe story, they actually added something into the end about like a whole thing going, look, we know it ends very abruptly, but that's because we think the chapters were lost as this guy came back from there and wrote a whole thing about why it ended that way and tried to explain it away because it was that much it was that hated.
The
But
Antarctic, old Johnny Devick, a backer who's watching live, has just pointed out the Antarctic does have this otherworldly nature that has drawn science fiction writers since the dawn of science fiction, because Frankenstein's monster also travels to the Arctic. Wait, is it the Arctic or the Antarctic he goes to? Either way, cold place at the poles.
Right, yeah.
were there
Tundra of some
penguins or were
kind.
there polar bears?
They were definitely Frankenstein's monster. I'm not sure which.
Right. And I think it's just because it's such a great backdrop for how inhospitable of a place it is. It's almost otherworldly because it's so it's such a hostile environment for humans that you're kind of crazy if you go there. Um, so I just think it's a great backdrop for this kind of storytelling. And obviously, Mountains of Madness, we can move on in a sec, but I think aside from the Call of Cthulhu, it is Lovecraft's most iconic story, right? You agree?
For sure.
Especially the way that it's linked to other and creates this franchise that's been going for well over 100 years. But I'd like to go back one more because there's an explorer called J.N. Reynolds, and he's the American explorer who kept saying, we've got to get down to Antarctica, we've got to get down to Antarctica. And he talked to the American president at the time, Quincy Adams, and Quincy Adams went, yep, you can do it, let's go. Then the next American president showed up, which was Andrew Jackson, who always seemed to have been a dick. And he went, nope, I'm cancelling it all. You can't have any funds. But Reynolds paid for it himself. He went to Antarctica. He gets to Antarctica, gets mutiny. His crew mutinies, dumps him on an island. He's stuck on this island for 2 years. Eventually, he is rescued, comes back. He's in South America for quite a long time, and he starts writing. And this is where I cannot stress how important this guy is. So the first thing he writes is a thing called Mocha Dick, about a giant white whale that's swimming around, the real story of this white whale, which is clearly Moby Dick. He then starts talking about the hollow earth theory, and that you've got to get to, and this is why he went on this expedition in the first place, that the earth's hollow and the only way to get in is through the poles, which is why he went down to the South Pole. And that leads to the Hyborian Age. So now we have Conan coming out of this as well. We also have Edgar Rice Burroughs. So this one story, and it's all, and narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym is absolutely based on his writings. He takes whole paragraphs out of Reynolds' writing about his expedition and uses it in his short story. So we have to go all the way back to 1830 and this guy called Reynolds, who looks to be the basis of almost all science fiction and science fantasy in the 20th century.
It's incredible. It's incredible how stories can web off from certain events like that.
Yeah, and apparently Edgar Poe, his very last word was Reynolds, because he was always on his mind.
Poor Poe. Pretty good. Distraught figure.
So to me, all these things are based on something that actually happened.
Yeah.
Right. And then
Stories
just
tend to be.
before we move on to who goes there, I mean, obviously, Guillermo del Toro was trying to make Mountains of Madness movie for the longest time. And he just like in the last 2 years, he released some like VFX test that looks like it's very much The Thing. Like it would have just been sort of a Thing kind of clone, but I still hope he gets to make it one day.
In an alternate universe, man, we could have seen it.
And I think you're going to get into trouble with all this. If anything's going to be change shape or form, you're always going to have to go back to The Thing. Like it's going to be the basis. Like that's the standard, and everything's going to be compared to that.
Right.
Absolutely.
And just, what is it, 2 years after The Mountains of Madness is published, we get Who Goes There? That's right. It's 36 and then 38. So we have Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., a.k.a. What was his pen name? Don Stewart, right?
Yeah. He had a couple of pen names. I think Don Stewart was the one he published Who Goes There under.
Yeah.
And it must have been so frustrating for him because he was obviously the editor of the magazine and he was writing stuff under his own name and it wasn't very well liked. But every time he wrote under his pseudonym, people were like, oh, this guy's fantastic. You should get more stories from him. So you must just imagine sitting there going, but it's me.
Pen names, the writer's best friend and worst enemy.
But yeah, and obviously, there's so much about his own background, and let's face it, The Thing's nothing but paranoia. It's all about paranoia, and we know like it's his family background, it's his mum and her sister. Like there's so much there that clearly influenced the story, but you have to look at Mountains of Madness to go, well, the location, the style, the scientific expedition, like it just cannot be. He had to have been influenced.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's impossible to ignore the influence, especially, like you said, given the proximity of the story. And yeah, stories do often take longer than a couple of years to pen out, but this was much shorter fiction, so it can be churned out in a much quicker pace. But yeah, the scientific influence is very evident. It's science fiction horror, but it's science fiction first and foremost. The amount of science that is burned into that narrative is incredible, and the entire cast is it's completely scientific. There's no military force there, unlike the first adaptation, which is fairly militaristic. But everyone in there is a scientist. We've got even Commander Gary, I believe, has some science background. I might be misremembering, but I know Mac definitely has some science background. He's a meteorologist, I want to say.
Yeah, I was going to say he's definitely not a helicopter pilot.
He's not.
In 1930.
I thought we'd have some pilots in there. I think we do have Van Wall, I believe, is a pilot. Not a helicopter pilot, but a pilot. We have all walks of scientific fields represented in Who Goes There. all going for a very specific reason, and it's to look at magnetism. It's to examine the magnetic fields of the South Pole, and a weird magnetic inaccuracy or something that shouldn't be possible draws a specific set of the crew anyway, of 35 of them, but draws like 5 or 6, Blair, Mac, the pilot Van Wall, and I think Gary might be there as well. There's a couple of them who go out to this very specific place where magnetism is all askew if, and they find a ship. They find the ship, and here's another Out the Mountains of Madness inspiration, we could say. They accredit the ship to something that's ancient because of how deep under the ice it has been. So they argue that this thing must have come down in prehistoric times, making it older than mankind. And the fear of what it might be instantly strikes a couple of the people in the camp. I think it might be Norris, it might be someone else, but Blair is hyper intrigued. He wants to know the secrets of this creature. And there's only a couple of the crew of the 30 odd who are actively scared. But that fear, the moment that the creature they realize isn't dead, the fear just floods, and everyone is suddenly like, why did we do this in the first place? It's like the hubris of one, the inaction of many, and the schadenfreude of 2 or 3 going, I told you, we shouldn't have done it. We shouldn't have pried. Curiosity kills the cat, doesn't it?
And you can see notes of that in Carpenter's The Thing. Like they they're like, shouldn't we be destroying this? Well, you can't, somebody's going to win the Nobel Prize over this. But it's the hardcore science. I have to say that is an absolute trope of Campbell. So he took over Astounding Science. He was the editor, and he went through all their writers and went, you got to stop sending me all this fantasy stuff. And anything that does not have any sort of science base is not going to get printed. And he really is the beginning of the more hard science of science fiction. So I wouldn't be. I'm not surprised at all that was the strong element in the story, because that is literally his modus operandi. That's what he was doing. He believed in it and he pushed it, and he wouldn't take any stories unless you did that.
Absolutely. It's very minute detail as well. For example, there's a part where they discuss how they're going to extract the ship, and they do acid tests on the ship, and they realize, the ship is composed of a magnesium composite that's resistant to acid and such. It's detailed scientific stuff, but it's not in a educational way. I believe the movie that adapted in 1951 felt more educational. It felt more like, you don't know these rudimentary scientific terminologies? Well, come here, take a seat, Jimmy. Let me teach you. The film has that quality to it of highbrow science, but Star Trekified, brought down to an easy to digest level. Whereas the story, the book, you need an entry point level of scientific understanding to grasp. And that was his audience at the time, right? If you're reading science fiction stories, you have a rudimentary knowledge of certain scientific practices.
And that actually got him into a lot of trouble, because he went to MIT. He was a scientist, and he knew about the atomic, and he actually noted he got in a lot of trouble with the FBI because he noticed that a lot of his magazines were going to a place in New Mexico. And these are all very, very big scientists that were ordering his magazine every week, every issue, are suddenly having them forwarded to New Mexico. And he'd pieced it together. And then later on, he actually wrote a story about like atomic explosion, like an atomic device. And the FBI actually put him under surveillance. So he was known for getting very specific with the science. That was the big thing for him, because he was a scientist. He went to MIT. So it's, again, not surprising at all.
Yeah,
I missed that part in Oppenheimer. I don't remember that scene.
Well, don't get me started on Oppenheimer. It was an Australian who did all that. Oppenheimer did nothing. It was an Australian. We get ripped off on everything. Look up a guy called Oliphant. He's the guy who literally built the thing,
Not the thing, but
Yeah,
but
not
not
the
the
thing.
thing. Yeah. No,
uh,
he honestly is. He's the guy who designed it all with the British, and then he took it to the Americans and went, "Look, the British can't get this to happen. Here it all is." Gave it to Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer went, "Okay, work with me, and we'll get it done." So, look up
yeah.
Oliphant.
And in your book, Phil, you call Who Goes There the most important sci-fi novella of all time. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, when you think of what's based, where it's led us, you know, um, and that's what I'm saying. Like that's why I had the idea. Of, like the more I looked into it, the more I realized it was a massive franchise because it's influenced so much stuff, and just um, the style, and as I said, the hard science mixed with horror, and what it would influence in the future. Like so much is influenced by the thing that it's hard not to argue that. You know, I still say Alien is absolutely a clone of the thing. Predator is a clone of the thing. Terminator was going to be a liquid metal. The original Terminator was going to be liquid metal until he heard that the thing was coming out in '82, and he cancelled the idea of working on a liquid metal Terminator. So the thing's just got its tendrils into everything. And so, yeah, it's just an incredibly important story.
It is. It
Love that.
it serves very much as well the paranoia aspect of that story. Uh, it's very easy to see the paranoia in cinema in as the 50s develop when you see so many science fiction movies in particular end with like like the 51 movie ends. Everyone, keep your eye in the sky. You never know what's going to come after you. Like that paranoia just swept through cinema like a madness, like a fire. It just burned everything it touched. And it comes down to that story.
It also comes down to, I think, one of the most important things moving on towards the 50s was the entire paranoia of the Western world with
Yeah.
teenagers and
Oh yeah.
horror. And so EC Comics are on the chopping block. Horror movies, Universal Monsters, they're now on the horror block. Living in Australia, we weren't actually allowed to show King Kong, the
Wow.
1930 King Kong, up until about 1970 because of what happened in the 50s and all these horror comics and how it was ruining the kids and influencing the kids. And that's why, and especially in England and Australia, and England was a very big market for US films. And
Yeah.
so when the UK absolutely banned horror films, you couldn't use horror, you couldn't do anything like that. That's why suddenly in the 50s we get all these sci-fi stories. Now the thing from another world is clearly a horror film, but they market it as a science fiction film. They never go into the horror bit, and they've tried to take as many horror elements out of it as they can. And that's why I think they use the idea of it being a carrot, because who's afraid of a carrot?
Yeah.
Whereas if they'd used anything else, they would have been pegged as a horror, and I think they would have got in trouble with the censors.
For those that don't know, in the 1951 movie, The Thing from Another World, the voice of the scientific world, I can't remember his name, the doctor, he says it's practically a carrot, a super carrot. And they just describe it as vegetables from that point on. But yeah, there's even a point in that film when the creature is defrosting, when the gormless idiot throws the warm blanket over it to defrost. That's better. Where he says something like, I need a good old fashioned horror book to keep me company. And that surprised me because I thought that horror was, especially around that time, it was vilified. You wouldn't touch the subject. And even the notion of a horror book was fairly alien. Like, even like, I know Dracula and stuff like that was available, but
And
I
and
don't know when horror was coined.
and if you go back and watch that kind of that film, clearly the thing's vampiric. It's looking for the blood. It's
Blood.
about the only
Yeah.
time blood's even mentioned in the things in that movie. But if it was an animal, that would be vampirism, and they would get in trouble
Mhm.
for that because you can't have vampires. So again, I think
Carrot.
that's why they used it a plant, because plants are plants, and it's not a vampire, it's not a monster, it's not it's a plant, and that I think they were skirting with trouble, and I think they were getting away with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And something we haven't talked about from the original novella is the alien is psychic. It has sort of telepathic abilities, which we don't see in any of the adaptations necessarily.
Actually, is it psychic? I know everyone says it is, but is there any evidence that it is? I was I was wondering that when I was reading it because everyone mentions, oh yeah, it's psychic, and so it knows what I'm thinking now. But nothing really acts. Blair is the exception. Spoilers for this very old book. Blair is
This is all spoilers, people.
yeah. At the end, the climax of the book is similar to the film. Honestly, they say, "Wait, we forgot about Blair." So they go up and realize he's building something anti-gravity, like boots, essentially. And so Blair's doing stuff. But if it was psychic, if it really was psychic, surely it could have got it done quicker, right? And they say like half an hour saved the human race. But I don't know. Everyone assumes it's psychic, and there's no, from what I know, there's no evidence of psychic behavior exhibited. But I could just be like it could be written that way on purpose, like trying to instigate that paranoia. Once again, you can't even trust your own mind because by the time you've thought of it, the enemy knows what it is. Or maybe it's psychic.
Or
And
it's
the
a,
other thing
yeah.
that gets lost is it's got a pretty specific look.
It does. It's blue. It's got
And
Yes.
worm hair, 3 red
yeah, and
eyes.
and that goes on through the comics and a lot of those things, but gets once they start putting it on screen, that's gone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And yeah, I mean, there's that great story in your book, Phil, about uh, whether the thing might be part dinosaur, and and I know Gregory Sharp in the comments said, could it be going back to the Lovecraft influence, could it be an elder thing or an eldritch horror of some kind, which is totally feasible. Um, but yeah, I know you said at the Blair thing in the '82 film. I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but there was a Tyrann. You thought it looked a little bit T-Rexy, and you reached
Yeah,
out
so
to
I was talking to Mike Plug, who actually
yeah.
designed the thing, and I asked him, and he went, "No, I wish I'd thought of that. That's a great idea, but um, sadly, it wasn't." But to me, ever since I first saw it, I'm like, and because I'm from the paleontology world, I was like, "Oh, are they saying it's been here for? It's either been on Earth for 66 million years, or it's been to the Earth before, and it's got that kind of DNA in its system that it can draw on." But yeah, sadly, no.
That's a shame. I've
But
always, whenever I saw that creature as well, which I wish we got. I love claymation. I wish we got more of it, even though it is shaky. But yeah, the Blair thing towards the end with the T-Rexy mouth side of things, it does look dinosaur-ish in nature for sure.
and one of the things about Mountains of Madness was like it was they were looking for fossils as well, because that was always a big thing about the Antarctica. They were trying to prove some things. That's why Scott of the Antarctic died, because he spent a day fossicking fossils. And if he hadn't wasted a day looking for fossils, he would have made it to his next base camp. So, prehistory has always had it. And that's why this is almost perfect. When you mentioned, let's do a prehistory look at the thing, I'm like, actually, that's a good name for this. That's really good.
I wish I could take credit for it, but that was all Ian Nathan, our director, who came up with that name. So kudos to Ian. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
No, I was just going to say, and recently there has been a fossil found in Antarctica, and it is called The Thing because of the movie. And I actually end my book with that fossil because it was the very last thing to be done. So the prehistory side of this story is something maybe can be tapped in the future, like because it's clearly there. It's buried deep, and who knows what else was buried there. Who's to say in the movie where the thing escapes from the crashed spaceship and they find it, a couple of meters away, who says that was the only one? There might be another one in the ice.
Absolutely. That's something that's touched upon in the 51 film, actually. They say at least one of the occupants is here, so they imply that there could be more. But I think that's just because green men from Mars were very popular in the early 50s, and so the impression of a singular pilot is, I mean, come on, if you're going to travel interstellar, take some friends with you.
especially when you got a ship that big.
Yeah,
But
it was huge.
that's the other thing that is a very important influence on the 51 film. It's 1947 that the UFO craze starts.
Mhm.
And so in the news, it's nothing but UFOs. And we're coming out of the Second World War. Like, cannot stress how important the Second World War was. The film industry's kind of stopped. They were only doing certain films. They were either doing war films to support the
Yeah,
war and get
propaganda.
people keen on the war, or they were doing westerns, or they were doing light-hearted stuff.
Yeah.
There was no horror, absolutely, because it had been pretty much banned by that point. But there was no science fiction at all. Hadn't been science fiction for decades, and this was the film. This was the one where they went, well, we're going to do something that people will want to see. And because you have all these soldiers coming out of the war, they don't want the 1930s storylines anymore. They want a lot harder storylines. They want more brutality. That's literally what they've just gone through. And I think this whole little cauldron of things happening at the time is an important point of why we get the movie we do in 1951. It's the war, it's the ban on horror, and it's the filmmakers themselves. They're an important part of it as well.
Absolutely. The scene where they discover the shape of the ship, it's called a flying saucer without uttering the phrase flying saucer, isn't it? That the guys all say, "Spread out, gents, and see if you can plot out the shape of the thing." And they just form a circle, and then the musical sting is there. The dun dun dun, like it's a discovery moment without uttering the phrase, "Hey, it's a flying saucer." I gotta say, my favorite character in that film is the reporter. I love him so much. He's just constantly up there, like, "Oh, I don't care what we're doing. We're just gonna get a good story." Yeah, just writing down everything.
But yeah, and because they probably didn't have to say anything because
It was on
literally
cultural
newspapers were
zeitgeist.
full of flying saucer stories constantly. So it would have
Yeah,
been literally in the minds of anybody who went and saw the film.
and they bring it up. There's a scene later when one of it might even be the character called Mac. It wasn't. It's not. It's not Macready, but there is a Mac in the film.
Yeah, there
Uh,
is a Mac.
I think it might be Mac or it might be Bob, one of those two, who says, "Hey guys, did you hear? Flying saucers aren't real." And he reads off this article that says, "In it, it's definitely confirmed proof flying saucers are not real," which is oh so ironic now, isn't it? When the U.S. government is saying, "Oh yeah, we ain't got a clue what they are." These things, unidentified flying phenomena or whatever they're called now.
And there is one thing before we go a bit too far that I think is an important influence on the 1951 movie, and that's the song.
Oh yeah.
And the song "The Thing," which came out, was written by a guy called Green. And if you've ever watched, gone onto YouTube and seen Leonard Nimoy singing about everyone's favorite Hobbit, this is the guy that wrote that song. And he's known for writing songs about like crazes coming up. He wrote songs about hula hooping and things like that. And the thing was going to be huge. Like, they were talking about in the newspapers for nearly a year that this big science fiction budget with Howard Hawks, like the Steven Spielberg of the day, Howard Hawks was making a science fiction film, which was considered less than B grade, a C grade film. And it was in all the newspapers, and they took out massive ads. Like, the ad campaign for the thing was phenomenal. And this guy's heard this coming and gone, "Oh, right, that's a good name for a song." And the song goes to number one all over the world and is so popular, they actually have to change the name of the film so that they don't get attached to the song. And that's why it's not The Thing, which it was going to be. It's now The Thing. And if you look at the posters, I love the posters. The posters are The Thing
The
from another world.
Thing. Well, yeah.
You can see they just clearly added that little font because they're like, well, we've already paid for the art. Let's just fix it. And so I think this song, and of course, for me, that also leads to the Addams Family, The Thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you know what the Thing's name actually is?
I don't actually know.
The full name is Thing T Thing, and the T stands for Thing.
The
And
thing.
originally, yeah, in the original comics, because it was actually a comic series in newspapers originally,
Yeah.
The Thing was always in the background, and it was a complete mystery of what it was. It was a mysterious shaped creature that would change shape all the time. Is this sounding familiar at all?
Just a
And it's
touch.
only once they made the TV show that they went, well, we can't do that, so we'll turn it into a disembodied hand. So for me, Thing T Thing is part of the Thing franchise.
It is the expanded universe. It does have its tendrils and everything, even
It really does.
family-friendly comedy.
And well, just because
Comedy.
we're talking about it now, let's add King Kong to that. The recent King Kong films. If you watch the Monarch storyline,
Oh, for sure.
there's a clear scene where they go Outpost 52 down in Antarctica.
Mhm.
So they're saying that another one of the things, the creatures on Earth, is the Thing down in Antarctica. So it's even in the Monarch storyline.
And Kurt Russell's in the Monarch
Yeah.
TV show.
Yeah, well, there's no way that was an accident.
Yeah.
And just jumping a few years into the future, in the 50s, 1955, we get the Quatermass experiment, or it was, as it was called in the US, the creeping unknown. And
Oh,
that's
really?
really it is widely considered to be one of the sort of the earliest known instances of body horror in the horror genre. What are your guys' thoughts on this film?
I loved it. I remember seeing it because Australia is basically England light. So we'd get all the English TV shows and all the English movies throughout the day. So I remember seeing it. But again, it's a science fiction film. It was a horror film. It wouldn't have been shown in Australia. But because they marketed it as a science fiction film, they were allowed to show it. And yeah, I remember watching it at the time going, this is the creepiest thing. This is so embedded in Doctor Who. And you can see how like those two are kind of embedding in each other. But also, if you watch one of the opening scenes, they go through a museum and there's fossils everywhere, and the ugliest looking dinosaur skeleton you will see in your life. I've taken photos of this thing and shown it to people. It's the weirdest. They've just clay animation this dinosaur skeleton or something. But again, so paleontology. But yeah, it's and it wasn't just that. There was lots of other movies as well. But that one's a very important one because it's kind of the British getting into the act.
For sure. Yeah, it definitely has. You can see the Thing influences more so the Thing from Another World 51 influencing that film. But there is one moment in particular where the creature first starts attacking people, and I think it's his right arm is like this malformed cactus kind of thing, and he's just throwing it around aimlessly. And it made me think of that scene in the '82 film when we see Bennings just, and it's his
Yeah.
right
His
arm
hand.
that's malformed. Yeah, it's one of the most iconic images from the film. And I thought, what is it with right hands? Why is it everyone's right hand that gets confuddled? Because I believe in the '51
Are you
movie as
saying we should
well,
add Star Wars to it as well? Because they all lose their right hands.
they do, don't they? There we go, connect. That's in the galaxy far, far, far away. But yeah, the Quatermass experiment, I hadn't seen it until recently. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I saw some reviews that are middling and others that say it's quintessential science fiction. And I think it is. I think it's quintessential science fiction. It's glorious. Although it does feel far closer to the 1985, 86 film from Toby Hooper, Life Force, to me, than it does The Thing, because it's this big, uh, almost countrywide chase film. Like they're chasing the monster.
Well, if we look at the timing of everything, so
Mm.
in 1950, the newspapers are full of, we're making this movie called The Thing. People are getting excited about The Thing. All these Hollywood studios are watching, going, if this hits, we're all going to make similar films. And so they've got them ready to go. They've got projects ready to go that aren't quite based on The Thing because they haven't seen it yet, the 51 film. But they know this is the kind of thing that's about to come out. So you suddenly get Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, you get War of the Worlds, you get Them, giant insects, This Island, Earth, and Forbidden Planet. But you also get older films being re-released like King Kong because they see a big boom's about to happen. But it's around the 1955 when you get Quatermass, and you also get other things that are clearly based. They've seen The Thing now, and they're basing those storylines on that, like it came from outer space. other movies that are far more closer to the original 1951 film than the one that came directly after it, because they hadn't seen it yet. They just knew it was going to be science fiction, so let's do a science fiction story. So
Absolutely.
that's why I keep saying it's such an important moment in time. This is the first science fiction film since the war, and it triggers this whole sci-fi boom of the 50s and late early 60s
Yeah,
until that
and
peters out.
like Josh was saying, it's an early instance of body horror because the creature, the alien encounter, it totally dilutes the humanity of this one person who's arguably beloved in the film's narrative. Like everyone has good things to say about this guy, and isn't it blood that like activates his instinct as well? He sees his wife prick her finger on a rose, and he just suddenly starts growling and gets very hungry looking, and then he just devolves into this oozy sludge. And he also destroys loads of animals. He goes after animals before he kills lots of people, which is something that happens in the short story. The animals are the first to go. It's what happens. Is it what happens in Thing for Another World? Yeah, they're the dogs.
Yeah,
The
the
dogs
dogs.
outside. It's always the poor dogs. Also, I
To
did
which
think
another arm's lost.
another arm, yeah. The arm with barbs, and it's very vegetative, much like the film.
Well, that's when they start to
Great
really
Mass.
get the idea that it's plant-based.
Yeah,
And the
and
interesting
that,
about those dogs, do you know the dogs' names?
I do not. Isn't there like 13 of them? That cast is
Oh,
huge.
in the movie, there was only 2 really,
Okay, yeah.
and they were Bing and Bob because, you got Bing
Oh,
Crosby and, they're doing the Carry On, the travel, movies, and so they named after, like 2 of the most famous Hollywood actors of the day. Sorry, there's just a
brilliant.
little welcome to my brain. Um, but and the dogs are actually an important part. Like, it's something that's kind of forgotten in the 82 film, is that's why they're there. One of the experiments they're to do, people keep going, why? Yeah. One of the things I like to watch is the reviews on YouTube, people watching the thing for the first
Mhm.
time because they've been told to what reaction channels. And they're always going, why are there sled dogs? But that was one of the experiments that they were supposed to be doing in 82. They were supposed to be down there seeing how other animals react to this environment and stuff like that. So that's why the dogs were there, um,
Mhm.
because they were an experiment. So yeah, sled
Gregory
dogs
Sharp.
and Mountain of Madness. When they find the camp, it was the dogs as well were
The
killed.
dogs are the first to
Right.
go. Yeah, it's always the poor dogs. Man's best friend. Gregory Sharp has mentioned that maybe the Blob is a cousin of the Thing. How can
Oh,
we forget the
absolutely.
Blob?
Well, you
And it
can't you
also
can't have some oozing. Although
it also got its
the
own song too.
It did.
Yeah. It's actually pretty catchy to say. Look up the Blob song after this, folks.
well, if you want a movie that is clearly based on the 51 film, it's in 1966. You get the Navy versus the Night Monsters.
Mm.
And it's a really, really low budget film. But it starts in Antarctica. And there's no reason for it to start in Antarctica. The stories, they're on a tropical island when they're fighting these aliens. It's got nothing to do with Antarctica whatsoever, really. But they had some B-roll footage of Antarctica, I think. But again, plant-based creatures. Like, there's so many little ticks for the 51, the Thing. So that's another one that I think gets a bit overlooked and is important.
Yeah, the 51 film
Right.
also set the precedent of having kind of like a moral argument within the film. You have the morally righteous soldier lads who are coming to do right by. I think they even specify, like, I don't work for the world, I work for America. I work for the U.S. Air Force, and it's we need to do right instead of we need to do what's best for the world, because the scientists are a small section of the scientists, at least, are saying this discovery, it could be the most important discovery that the world has ever known. And that hubris of man to try and uncover the unknown, that dates back all the way to Lovecraft, and how man's hubris is ultimately his downfall. uh, I mean, all the way through Lovecraft's writing, knowledge is the corrupting factor because knowledge is power. And in the 51 movie, in the Mass experiment, when scientists go a little too far, it tends to be their undoing. And this level of knowledge that people get in these films, often, even in the 51 movie, he's not really vilified, even though he's definitely the villain and tries to side with the carrot monster, like, at the end of the film. He gets spared, and in the radio operator that the windows stand in, he even says, like, "Our brave scientist, Dr. So-and-so, he did his best, dang it." And so he gets redeemed at the end, trying to say, it's not bad that we're examining the unknown. We should be striving to examine the unknown, but let Mr. Army Man be there beside you to tell you what's right. With the boys in blue and that very militaristic moral compass being a prevalent theme in that film, I believe that translates to the 55 Quatermass experiment as well. Like, having a very militaristic figure present that guides science. So science needs a guiding hand that knows what's right and what's wrong, and you can't let science run amok, because then you get mad scientists and creatures that we don't know what to deal with.
There may have also been a very practical reason for that, and that's because when you're making these films, you need the military support.
Yeah.
And Howard Hawks went to the military, and they went, "Can we read the script?" And they went to the Air Force, I think it was, and they went, "No, no, this is
Yeah.
you're giving it to the military, and it's all science." And I think they may have skewed it more towards the military being the heroes of the day, just to try and get the support from the military, so that, because they had to use the bases to land when they were filming and up in Alaska and stuff like that. So I think there was a very practical reason why that was there. It's because he wanted,
Absolutely.
like, he had to try and get the military to support the film.
And Dom, just back to your point of sort of science and hubris. Ian Mitchell brings up the questionable research Dark Horse comic, which is, it takes place on like a boat of a bunch of scientists trying to study the thing, and it invariably gets free and takes everyone over. Um, so it's just, even when they know what they're dealing with, and they still can't contain it, which is it's an interesting story. Highly recommend checking it out.
Hubris is the inciting incident in the short story. Where Blair says it's dead. Things this big can't reanimate. Maybe some cells are alive, but it's fine. And if it has, like, the alien equivalent of cholera, it's so genetically different from us, it can't infect us. It's fine. So a well-educated individual, his knowledge is his downfall. And yeah, that's such a recurring theme in so many science fiction stories, if not all of them. Like Frankenstein. Oh, I can do it. It's fine. Nothing will go horribly wrong. It's fine.
And there was the aliens ones where they're trying to turn them into military weapons, and they clearly know how dangerous it is. Same thing. Almost every Doctor Who episode ever is Doctor Who going, "What are you doing, you silly scientists? Stop doing this." So,
You thought you could control it, you fool.
yeah. So that's a very solid trope.
Yeah.
Right. And just jumping ahead a little bit from the 50s and 60s, we go into the early 70s, and we get the Horror Express in 1972, very loose adaptation of the John W. Campbell story. And Dom, I know you were a fan. You were talking about it on the Slack channel the other day.
The Horror Express. Not only does it have one of the grooviest theme songs of all time, Horror Express is a great film, if only that it has Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing just hamming it up together, like not being antagonists towards one another. And of course, Telly Savalas steals
I was
every
going to say, don't
scene
forget Telly
he's in.
Savalas.
How can you? My God. Like,
And
the
that
cast
coat he's
alone.
wearing.
Oh, yeah. But it's the thing on a train. Something spooky has been brought aboard this train.
Something
There are
frozen.
Something frozen from the tundra.
Yeah. Again, it's very at the Mountain of Madness as well. Like, we've just had an expedition and we've brought this thing on, and it runs amok when people start to poke around. But of course, it's kind of saturated in 70s sleazy ooze as well, which is another reason why I love the film. Oh,
Because it was a weird film to be made. Wasn't it? I think it's either Spanish or Italian, but it's an English speaking film.
oh
Like,
yeah,
it's just so many weird influences on that film, the way it was made. Like,
it's so
it's just
70s. Yeah,
crazy.
it's Spitalian
Yeah.
English. Like it's this amalgamation, this melting pot of ideas that, yeah, it's an amalgamation, very similar to the creature of the thing. It's all things brought together to form this greater creature.
And now that I think about it, at the beginning, when the two main characters meet, I think they're paleontologists or maybe
I believe they
archaeologists.
are. Or they're like, yeah,
Yeah.
they're
So
rival archaeologists.
yeah. So again, we're getting into that like ancient science influencing storylines and stuff like that. So it's again tick 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 tick.
Yeah. And fun fact, we did ask John Carpenter about Horror Express and like its relation to the thing. And
Oh,
his
really?
answer was, and I quote, "The hell are you talking about?" So he admitted he had never made that connection between his own movie and Horror Express and the Campbell story in the 51 film.
Well,
So
when you draw inspiration from similar things, you're bound to hit a few similarities. Like I said, I don't think that uh, Carpenter paid homage to the Quatermass experiment by having Benning's right arm be the thing that gives him away. But the symbolism's there, and when I saw it, that's all I thought of. I thought of Benning's. Instantly made that connection. So
Unfortunately, the one person we probably would have to ask died. So the
yeah,
scriptwriter, because he wrote the script and they were pretty much hanging on that script. So maybe he had seen it. That would be interesting.
right, Bill Lancaster, you mean?
Bill Lancaster, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. And um, and then 2 years later, we get the directorial debut of the man himself, John Carpenter, with Dark Star, which
Rockstar.
he co-wrote with Dan O'Bannon of future Alien fame. And you can call it Dark Star. I call it Attack of the Killer Beach Ball, but we all have our own interpretations. Um, yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on Dark Star?
Well, clearly, here we have the crux of like everything that comes into the 80s and late 70s. Like they're both working with each other and they're both feeding off each other's storylines and things like that. And they're both talking about the thing. That's the important thing, is they both love the 1951 film and they're both talking about it. And in my research, in my book, I actually found a letter from a Daniel O'Bannon writing to famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, complaining about their edition of Who Goes There. They did a truncated, shorter version in the magazine, and he's complaining about that. So he is clearly an absolute fan, and so that's why Alien is part of the Thing franchise. Because think about it. You never see the alien in the same shape once. It's constantly changing shape.
Yep.
You're starting off in a cold, hostile environment. Like, it's the Thing.
Right, and this Dark Star was like it set the stage for Alien, which written by the same guy, both movies.
Yep.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
It's definitely a
Alien is what
progenitor.
convinced the success of Alien is what convinced Universal to make the thing. But if you think about it, Alien was already influenced by this John Carpenter film, so it's
And Dan O'Bannon
interesting to
was
think
influenced
about.
by all the stuff that he was
Right.
influenced by earlier, including Who Goes
Oh
There.
yeah. Who Goes There?
Um,
Dune. Like he worked on Jodorowsky's Dune before it was canned. Then he took all of that. Oh, he worked with someone else who ended up doing the Thing as well. I can't remember. Not the Thing. Alien. Can't remember who. But all that inspiration just soaked into Dan, and he went on to do Alien, which again all goes back
Giga.
to that.
Yeah.
Giga. Thank you.
Sorry,
Yes.
it's in my head.
No, thank you. That was great. That's you pulled it from mine as well. It's perfect. Man, I forgot. We should have gotten that movie. It would have been so weird.
I would have, especially like all the special effects guys, the guys that work on everything in the 80s. Like,
Yeah.
that documentary was astonishing to me. And that's actually one of the influences on my book, because I watched that documentary going, that's amazing. And then when I kept finding out about the thing, and then with the 40th anniversary coming up, I went, well, nobody's ever written a book about this. We should get into this. So it's weird how everything influences everything. It's all connected, man.
It is. We need a cork board with red strings going from Who Goes There to H.P. Lovecraft to
Well,
Jodorowsky's Dune.
I even say Predator is based on the thing, because if you
Yeah,
think about the same thing,
yeah.
it's a small team of men going into a hostile environment. It's constantly changing shape. You can't really see what it is. Like, all these things are
Right, and
kind of
the
influenced.
opening scene, the opening shot of the ship coming to Earth is like a
Yeah, same
basically a
shot.
ripoff of the Carpenter film.
That should be a good social media post, actually, Josh.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, thank you.
Would the crew from Predator be able to take on the Thing if they dropped in the Antarctic in their camo gear?
Well, I actually speculate when I was connecting how the King Kong universe is now connected to the Thing. Can you imagine if the Thing got into King Kong or Godzilla? And then that led me to, if Alien is part of the same franchise, maybe that's why it has its blood. Because
Yeah.
it's the one, maybe the alien is going to be, the xenomorph is going to be the savior of the universe, because the Thing can't infect an alien with its acid blood, and that's why it's got acid blood, because it's a reaction to the Thing.
There you go. So the Xenomorph is truly the savior of the movies. They're the good guys all along, everyone. We got it wrong. They're trying to
It's all
save us,
connected,
dang it.
man. It's all connected.
But speaking of connected, in the 70s, we also have Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right? Which is more body horror.
Right. Right. And
And
someone brought up in the comments, we were talking about plant-based aliens, and
Day
these
of
are
the
all, pod
Triffids.
people. Yeah, Day of the Triffids. But just in 1978, I just wanted to do like an honorable mention to Philip Kaufman's remake, because that really showed how you could take a classic property from the 50s and really make it dark and edgy and just timeless.
And
And
almost
obviously,
definitive.
yeah,
Because when you
right,
think of
exactly.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, everyone in the comments say which one you think of, but for me, it's definitely the one from the 70s.
Right.
Good God, such a haunting movie. And yeah, remakes became quite popular shortly after that as well. Like, I can't remember many remakes before then, but we had The Thing, The Fly, The Blob, the trilogy of the
Right.
80s.
Right. And these are
All
all
science
bench
fiction.
for practical effects, body horror, The Fly, especially like going back to the Quatermass experiment, the way the guy begins to decay reminded me of
Mhm.
Seth Brundle in The Fly, 3 decades later. So,
And the reason for all that is, obviously, you've now got the people who grew up watching the originals now in a position to remake, just like Carpenter did. He loved the Thing, and he says he didn't want to remake it, from what I've read, but he was clearly a fan of it. So
Oh, yeah.
all these guys grew up with these films, and now they're getting, what would you like to make next? Oh, I'd love to make The Fly.
right.
I'm just imagining executives being like, "The what? That movie from the 50s? You're crazy. Get him out of my picture studio. Here's $2 million. Go do whatever you want."
Right. And even, Peter Jackson and King Kong remaking it all those
Yeah.
years later, like he saw it on television and it affected him profoundly. And then when he was in a position to pick, hit his pick of the litter, remade King Kong. And I love Jackson's remake personally. I know we're kind of off topic now, but
The
um,
Well,
remake
to
always
get
goes back.
off that topic, he's got one of the biggest private air forces in the world? All those
Peter
biplanes and
Jackson.
everything. Yeah, he loved the biplanes in that film so much. He's been buying biplanes for years. And I used to work at the Australian War Memorial, and he actually did a film for us that we show to people when they come in. And it's a battle over the Western Front with his own private air force. He's got so many of them. So let's New Zealand could be invading us with biplanes.
Yeah, old school.
The Red Baron strikes again, but from New Zealand.
And also in the 70s, I mean, we just discussed Alien, but a few years before that, we have the Doctor Who episode. You brought that up. You brought up Doctor Who a few times, Phil. We have Seeds
Yeah.
of Doom. Look at that
Oh
beauty.
yeah, look at him.
And it is the weirdest episode. If you haven't seen it, it is such a weird episode. It's possibly the most violent Doctor Who episode.
Mm.
Doctor Who goes to town on people, and he's killing people. And the first 20 minutes is absolutely the thing. It's starting in Antarctica. They're discovering things in the ice. Like, it's so the thing. It's obviously. But my favorite part of that is it was written by a guy who was like related to Joseph Banks, and Joseph Banks is the botanist who sailed with Captain Cook and helped. Australia was originally going to be called Banksia after him, and started the Kew Gardens in England. So clearly he has a big plant interest, and yeah, he wrote that, and I think it was also kind of used again for another UK TV series called The Avengers. But yeah, it's an amazing episode. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Like it's probably online somewhere, but it is so violent. Doctor Who is killing people.
As we are starting to draw to, we're getting very close to the end of this stream, and we are getting very close to
Yes.
the making of 1982's The Thing.
Right. So we already touched on Alien, but that was really kind of the watershed moment, the turning point that convinced Universal to remake The Thing. And yeah, I mean, as we've discussed, this was sort of influenced by Dark Star and everything Dan O'Bannon loved growing up, as well as John Carpenter. So yeah, I mean, it's another instance of cosmic horror, of confronting the unknown and not being able to stop it.
Yeah, and as Phil mentioned earlier, the idea that the xenomorph actually does change shape pretty much every time we witness it, it's incredible. It's this unknown, unfathomable thing that is constantly evolving and changing. And it's body horror. It uses our DNA as an incubator. It, it's almost it's silly. Like it's almost like, oh yeah, of course it's inspired by Lovecraft and Who Goes There. It clearly is. Look, it's identical. It's practically the same thing, and you don't notice it because it wears its flesh so uniquely. You don't see the influence unless you scratch the surface and be like, wait a minute, you're the Thing.
Right. It's
Well, I think
the Spider-Man meme.
Yeah.
when you watch Alien, it wasn't the storyline you were watching it for. You were just taken away by the atmosphere, the environment. Just it was so well made. You just hadn't seen anything like that except maybe Star Wars. But even then, Star Wars was a little bit cheesy. Where this thing was hard science, and the planet it landed on, and then you've got the astronomer, the skeleton. Look at the observatory. It just kept giving you things that you'd never seen. The engineer, that was it. Kept giving you things you hadn't seen before, and so you're just watching this stuff, and like it wasn't the actual storyline that you're watching it for. It was it was the alien,
right?
The spooks, the scares, and I think the science is oddly very light in that, and I think it's because it's got the space trucker vibe going for it. Everything's kind of grungy and used, so you don't take in the heavy sci-fi atmosphere. But I think that also kind of influences 1982's The Thing. Like we've been mentioning, there's so much science in the adaptations up until this point. And then The Thing itself, everyone is scientific, Mac being an exception, I suppose, he's a pilot, but everyone's kind of there for scientific purposes. And how much science do we see in The Thing? We see a computer screen that does some computations that
I guess you get a bit. Like if you think about it, they're doing the the autopsies of the alien creature when they've got it. They're doing the blood tests, the blood test serum. They're going to do that. You have they're trying to work out another test once all the blood's been destroyed. Like there is a bit, but I think the whole point about the 82 film is it's a steam train. That thing,
Yeah.
once it gets going, it's get going and nothing's getting in its way. So there's no point to stop to do that sort of stuff because that's not what this story is. This story is we're going to keep pushing you, and the second you think you're caught up, we're going to push you even further and get it faster. And this is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen, and you're not going to get a chance to catch your breath. So I think it's the actual style of the film more than the substance of the film. Why you don't get the science that you do in the others.
Absolutely. Yeah, the style. And like you said, being in the point of time when it was filmed, the 80s being, late 70s, 80s being far less concerned with educating the populace with movies like this. I mentioned it earlier, but the 51 film, it did feel kind of educational, edutainment-y. They kept talking about scientific practices, but then dumbing it down for the less scientific guys who were there. It's all mumbo jumbo to me, science man. I'm the army guy, and we don't get any of that in. Like, we get a computer that tells us, oh yeah, if a cell infects this is when the human population's doomed. There we go. We get that exact scene that Josh is wearing. That it just tells us, oh yeah, you're doomed if this gets out. And that's the crux. That's for me the crux of that movie: fear, paranoia, and the absolution of the end. Like, if this doesn't happen, we're all screwed. Like, this is it. This is a moment where we have to act or we're gone. And there's no hope. There's no time to think. There's no time to question. We have to do. And I think that is very much like an 80s kind of thing. Like, things are happening fast and we need to act or else we're going to get swept up in it.
I think you also got to look at the mechanics of the directors.
Yeah.
So Carpenter, and because he's going back to the original story, he says that time and time again. Like, I'm not making a remake of 51. We're going back to the original story. We're going to bring back the blood test. We're going to bring all this stuff back, and that's all about the paranoia of that. Whereas 51, and it's about hiding. The thing doesn't want to be seen. It's trying to hide. It's trying to hibernate. It's just trying to not be
not a fighter.
noticed.
They mention it in the book. It's not a fighter. It won't fight you. It's trying to hide and just outlast us.
But if you go back and watch The Thing from Another World, it's always there. It's the most amazing film. Like, there's a scene where they're walking down a corridor and it's at the other end of the corridor, and the camera just kind of picks it up as it pans along, and they never see it. It doesn't reference it. They open up a door and it's right there. Like, the creature is always in your face and it's always aggressively attacking. Whereas
and no one's afraid
82
of it.
films, well, because they're manly men and they've got axes.
Exactly.
And there's a woman there. They can't be seen being scared. There's one woman.
One woman that completely distracts the protagonist, like, entirely. The reason he's going to that neck of the woods in the first place isn't for anything other than to see his girl.
And if you want to discover who the true monster is of the 51 film, read my book. Because what Howard Hawks does to that woman is horrific. And what he's done to all the women he's worked for, like Lauren Bacall, they've all got a certain voice. And it's how he gets them to get the Howard Hawks voice is horrific. It's terrible what he puts those women through to get that husky voice. So, yeah, there was a real monster on the set there, and it was Howard Hawks.
I can believe it.
So we don't think Christian Nyby actually directed?
Not a chance. There's not a chance in hell. Even the main actors said he didn't direct it.
Yeah.
And like, he directed films, he directed TV shows, and he directed films after The Thing, and none of them are even remotely close to the quality of. It's clearly Howard Hawks. Howard Hawks directed The Thing, and I think it's because for two reasons. One, it was the first science fiction film, and it's considered a low grade film. So if it fails, he doesn't want his name attached.
Yeah.
And he owed that guy. Like he'd made a movie, Red River, and that's another important film we should probably mention about it being an influence. And it was such a horror film. Like he just kept filming and filming, and he went to edit it and couldn't do it. So he got his editor in to do it, and he did such a good job. He went, "Well, you've always wanted to be a director. I'll get you to as a listed director on my next film, just so you get your license."
Yeah.
Nah, Howard Hawks directed it. There's no way.
We could talk about the influences and the long reach of the thing until the end of time. It just has spread so far and wide and has its roots so deep in science fiction in general. And it just goes back to a basic human fear of the unknown. And what you can't explain is always so much more terrifying than what you can explain. And unfortunately, we do have to come to an end at some point. But Phil, you do have a book that has infinitely more researched and digestible than listening to us chinwag for hours and hours and hours.
And
And
the
we're making a
audiobook's
movie.
coming. The audiobook
Perfect.
with all the other stuff is coming. So I'm doing it at the moment. So it's going to be about twice the size. So I'm quite excited about that.
And where can fans get the book if they're interested, Phil?
They can just jump on Amazon or any of your normal online booksellers, or Marcosi, UK comic book publisher. Marcosi is the publisher. But yeah, please do. It's a good book. You'll like it.
Did
It
you
is
like this
awesome.
talk? I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Phil, thank you so much for joining us. This was super fun and super illuminating. I learned a ton of stuff I didn't know. So
Thank you very much. Thanks
thank
for
you.
having me.
Oh, always. I love a good history lesson, especially when it's about the thing and H.P. Lovecraft and all things horror and spooky and filmmaking in general. Yeah, I've learned a lot today. And here I
And
was
Phil,
coming in with pockets of notes, and I've got so much more now.
Gregory Sharp asks, are you narrating the audiobook?
But I actually do history walks and town walks here, and every time I try and record it, day by day, my voice sounds differently. So I have cloned my voice on an AI, and it sounds a lot like me. I think I've got it to the point where it sounds like me. So I might be doing an AI one, which means like I'm going to have a thing doing the thing.
Thingception.
Very fitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the joke I'm making anyway. Like I'd like to, and I do a lot of my narrations for other stuff, but for a whole book, I just don't think I can keep my voice the same pitch.
Understandably so. Well then.
Well, thank you all. This was great. And yeah, we might have to do a part 2 just to now talk about
Well, we didn't talk about all the influences of the Thing 82 on everything after it.
right, exactly. Post history.
X-Files.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That mild influence that
Yeah.
episode was such a rip-off. But I loved it. I loved the ice episode.
Anyway, we should save it.
Yeah. We should, yes. Let's save all this for the next time. Same thing channel, same thing time. But yeah,
Well,
we're
thank
gonna
you all
call
for
end.
yes. Thank you for joining us, Phil. Thank you all for tuning in at home. This was awesome, and we'll see you next time. See you next month for ThingCast number 4.
See you then.